What we have here is my latest acquisition. This is something I picked up at the early television convention during their swap meet about a week ago. Yeah. On the Friday the 16th. And what it is a 21-inch portable Zenith black and white set from 1965. It is a model N23270-6, and it's a metal cased portable, and it is metal cased with Space Command 300. That means it has a remote control, and it does work. It has a few issues, which I will demonstrate, but I'm going to do this video a little different than I have been doing my videos. It is going to be a restoration video, but it's going to be approached a little differently than I have been approaching videos in the past. My past videos I tended to do just be a cap changer, and I want to get away from that. It's not to say I won't change caps. There are caps that need changed in here. There is one Bumblebee. It needs to go. But that's the only wax paper type cap in here. The others are electrolytics, which will need changed, especially in the remote receiver, because the remote receiver is receiving power and on anytime the set is plugged in, unless you flip the off switch on the back, which is like a vacation switch for the old instant on sets. There are electrolytics. They will need to be changed because, well, Zenith had a little issue with their electrolytics not being the most reliable, from what I hear, so I'm just going to change them in the power supply. There's a couple coupling caps, but nothing too big. There's actually only about 5 total electrolytics in the set. Almost every other cap in here is either a ceramic cap or a film cap of some sort, including some orange drops, which I think were replacements because everything else does not look to be orange drops. So these sets, because of that, tend to just kind of work. You can kind of just almost turn them on and use them. The other difference in this video is going to be in my approach is going to be this intro is going to be split into 2 parts. There's going to be this intro, the description of the set, and there's also going to be a little history. Having just come from the early television convention, I feel that I should do a little history and how we got to this point in 1965 with this set. A little company history, a little comparison between them and RCA and other companies, and why things were done the way they were in these sets. And then in the second portion, I will do the evaluation. So, 1965, color was coming in. It had been introduced. Color, as we know it, NTSC color was introduced to the world January 1st, 1954, with the Tournament of Roses parade and in Pasadena, and a lot of hoopla from RCA to sell the first color set, the CT100, a 15-inch color set. So by 1965, color was starting to become established. It still wasn't big because the sets were very expensive and there was still limited programming. But by 65, the companies were trying to push color sets, but black and whites were still ruling the day, and companies needed to do something to make their black and white sets appeal, to customers, so they would go out and buy them. So this is one of those sets that has something a little different. Zenith had, if you go back, way back to radio, there had been accessories to be quote-unquote remote controls for radios even back into the early to mid-30s. Philco was famous for having one that kind of looked like a telephone dial, and it was attached to the radio with a long cord and let you change the station, volume, power, and such. When TVs came in, the first sets really didn't have anything like that up until after the war. There was really no need for it, but it was not there. So after the war, TV was starting to become more popular and remote controls showed back up. RCA put one as factory standard on their Berkshire projection entertainment system, where the remote would let you change channel, volume, and also picture contrast and brightness. No power switch because that was up on the set, and it was a multi-function switch because since it was an entertainment center, radio, phono, TV combo. Other companies introduced accessories that you could put some type of remote control on your set. Some were as simple as a simple switch that you put in line with the speaker to mute the volume during a commercial, say. Zenith sold an accessory for their sets called the Lazy Bones, which was a remote on a cable, and you modified your set and it would control, I do believe, and I might be mistaken, but I do believe power, volume, contrast, brightness. It may have done channel as well, but it did do channel on certain sets because the tuner had to be modified to accept a motor to motorize the tuner. Then Zenith introduced the Flash-O-Matic, which was a wireless remote control. Basically, it was a flashlight, and there was a photo cell in the set, and it operated various functions. The problem with that was it used visible light. So any light falling on the set would cause things to change. But later on, Zenith came up with this system. An ultrasonic remote control they called Space Command. And a remote control, and I don't have this apart, and I'm not going to take it apart, but what you have here are two buttons, and then you have hammers inside that strike while tuning forks emit an ultrasonic pulse. It's picked up here by an ultrasonic receiver, and then those tones actuate through relays certain things to happen in the set, such as power. And then you can also change the channel. And then the volume. Not going to demo it yet. The volume on this has 3 steps, high, medium, low. You choose it by hitting that. Advantage of the ultrasonic, no batteries needed. Very simple. Disadvantage. If you had pets, you might drive them nuts. But also certain things could trigger it. Certain things that you would do sometimes around the house caused ultrasonic energy to be released and trigger things on the set, such as jingling of keys can do that. Also, sometimes turning on things like vacuum cleaners would also trigger it. So not perfect. Later on they introduced the infrared remote control that we are all familiar with. At first it was just kind of an analog thing where it would pulse on and off, but then they came out with the digital coding system, which is what we use today. That's remote control. That's where we are. Now the other things for these sets, I'm going to describe. I'm going to flip the set around to show you. Okay, here we are in the back of the set. The construction of this set is typical Zenith of the period. In the 1957-58 model year, several companies started using printed wiring boards, as they call them, or as we call them now, printed circuit boards. RCA and Philco were the two big ones. Admiral started using them as well. Now, there's nothing wrong with printed circuit boards. They're actually a good thing. But the early ones had a few problems. And The main problems being that from the heat produced by the tubes, the sockets would crack, the solder connections would crack, and sometimes even the boards would warp, causing distortions and causing intermittent connections. Now, Zenith stayed with this type of construction, which is not quite point to point because they have these little pins here that they fill with solder and they put the wires in. So they kind of act like terminal strips. So it's point to point, but it's a little different. And Zenith stayed with this type of construction even in solid state gear such as transistor radios and such. The big transistor radios for a while. And in TVs, they stayed with this type of construction all the way up until the Chroma-Color series of color televisions in 1970, and which were three-way hybrid tube, transistor, and solid and IC. Now, there's a couple reasons for this that Zenith claims. They claim that the hand wiring is better than the hand soldering was at the time. They say that the connections are more solid and such, but there's another reason for that. And it goes back to the founding of Zenith and a competitor, RCA. RCA was founded in 1916 as a holding company, a patent holding company that was a conglomeration of American Marconi, General Electric, and Westinghouse. With that, they had already a CEO or chairman of the board over at American Marconi, and he came over. His name was David Sarnoff. A lot has been written about David Sarnoff, a lot has been said about David Sarnoff. And one thing about David Sarnoff is he was as a businessman, he was very ruthless and not a nice person, to put it very mildly. On the other hand, you have Zenith, which was founded in Chicago, instead of New York, so you've got that bit of rivalry, New York-Chicago thing going on to begin with, by Admiral McDonald, Eugene F. McDonald. And they were founded in 1918, and they even hated the idea of having to pay licenses to RCA to get certain patents. At the time that RCA was holding them was a licensee, such as super heterodyne receiving circuitry. And, and in his dealings with David Sarnoff, Edmund McDonald learned to really not like him. In fact, by the time the 50s and 60s came through, McDonald couldn't even stand to be in the same room with Sarnoff. Even they had to be there for, meetings for industry powwows. So that, and RCA also treated one of McDonald's friends, Edward Howard Armstrong, very, very poorly, trying to run him out of business with his FM radio circuitry and his invention of FM radio, and trying to run him out of business. And McDonald was always a staunch supporter of FM and Armstrong, and up until McDonald's death always put on the FM receivers that they were an Armstrong licensee and paid the license fees, where other companies such as RCA designed circuits that were different than Armstrong so they didn't have to pay the licensee. So that's kind of where this comes from, that this construction was still used by Zenith even as other companies had been using printed circuit boards well into the, for about 7 years already. And Zenith would continue to use this for about another 5 years, so about 13 years. Zenith would, after other companies introduced circuit boards, printed circuit boards, Zenith would continue to use this wiring construction method.